Yeah, it's like even more painful that the current government in the UK just basically went in the complete wrong direction and said they're going to invest more in fossil fuels. And you just think like that's just I think it was like the UN Secretary General said something like it's like moral and economic madness or something, which is obviously true. And you just think, wow, yeah, it's so frustrating.
And
But
they do it so blatantly now too, don't they? But I guess that's again where the athletes can come in. I've seen it like I saw the Australian Prime Minister tweet at the French Prime Minister before the game the other day, and just like politicians trying to stay relevant because athletes are just taking the stage and they're taking it by storm. And I think so many
mm,
people have their eyes on athletes, and we have such an opportunity here to make a real difference.
I think it's yeah, definitely. But I think it's like it's super fascinating as well because I think even on the sort of progressive side of politics and people are kind of championing like nuclear energy, and I know there's probably like there's definitely room for that, but I just it just it baffles me a little bit because I think so much of the issues can be solved by properly insulating people's homes for a start and saving people's bills as well on top of that, which people are really struggling with at the minute. But if you did that alongside investing heavily in renewables, that would be enough.
Yeah.
Um, Plus, nuclear is super expensive and takes like a really long time to come, into play. Um, that's a bit of a segue, but like I just yeah, the two groups that get monstered the most, like Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain. If
Yeah.
you actually just disregard everything else and just focused on those two messages, you think, yeah, they're bang on, really.
Yeah, and did you see recently the GB News interview with the Just Stop Oil advocate? And
Yeah,
I've never
yeah,
seen a more disturbing interview, I think. Like,
yeah.
what did you
It
make of that?
it was just like it was obviously had echoes of Don't Look Up. Like it was very like, but even more mental because they're actually laughing about people. And I think obviously you kind of hope that uh, news anchors have like more maturity than like 13-year-old lads, like because it's just like they're laughing essentially at like the phrasage or the wordage that the guy used that was on.
Things are already getting so much worse. I mean, have you seen in New York the smoke? People couldn't leave their house because they couldn't breathe. 10 million people couldn't leave their house because they couldn't breathe because of wildfires in Canada. 33 million people in Pakistan last year had their lives completely decimated by floods. Their houses, their pets, their wedding photos washed away in one go. The same with the floods in northern Italy, same with the 40-degree heat wave here, where 1,700 people died in 2 days.
What
40
here?
people died.
Did you say?
Yes, last summer in 40 degrees.
How many people did you say died? We just had a few sound issues there. In the UK, you're attributing how many deaths to climate change over a couple of days?
During our 40-degree heat wave last summer, 1,700 people died.
Okay, but we all want British people to live a good, healthy life. We don't want 1,700 people dropping dead over 2 days.
Where did they get it from?
Why
Anyway?
did how did climate kill these people?
Okay, so there's a variety of different factors, right? In this case, it was because of the extreme heats. People died from heat stroke. When the temperature gets hot enough, for example, when it gets so hot that the sweat no longer cools you down, you literally boil in your own sweat. I know that sounds like complete exaggeration.
It does actually.
When it gets,
I'm afraid it does sound like exaggeration. I've never heard of anyone boiling
exaggeration
in
to say that people die in fires.
I've never heard of anybody boiling in their own sweat. What, boiling to death?
If there's a wildfire, people die from it. If there's a flood, people die from it. If there's a hurricane, people die.
For before you die?
This shouldn't be so funny. Listen, what we're finding.
People are dying, and you're literally laughing.
Well, because you're making silly claims. Boiling to death.
Listen,
to say that the claim.
But essentially, because and this is the other thing, is that people seem like people like that are often seem super reluctant to just say, I don't really understand what you're talking about. Can you kind of explain it a bit further?
Yeah.
They just kind of dismiss it out of hand,
Yeah.
and just like laugh at the guy. And I just think I actually had to Google this phrase because I'd never heard of it before. It was like I can't remember what was it. What was it called now? Um, I've forgotten what it's called already. Something
What
like
about
bulb, uh,
wet bulb?
wet bulb temperature. And like I've read the description of it, and it's not far off what he said. I mean, boiling might have been like maybe a little bit hyperbolic, but like it was you essentially cook because your body just instead of like sweating to cool you down, your sweat's so warm that it actually has the opposite effect.
Yeah, and that
You just-
happens when the temperature's too hot from the outside and too dry.
yeah. So it's not actually that far off, like being
We've
true,
seen that happen in different places around the world, and he was trying to bring attention to it. The
for
heat,
sure. Yeah.
floods, droughts.
Yeah, and obviously talking about people dying who actually did die because of the high temperatures, and they're laughing about it is like really awful. Like, but kind of funny because of how awful it is. You're just like, oh God,
It
really?
seems pretty forced as well. Like they really didn't have any other comeback, and so they
No.
wanted to dismiss him and make him seem. And didn't the other anchor say like, "Oh, you need to grow up," and then they chuckle away about people dying?
I'm sorry, Alex. I think
Alex.
I think you need to, if you don't mind me saying, Alex, I think you need to grow up a bit actually, because this is ridiculous.
Oh, really? Really?
Alex,
Okay. Well, I appreciate your opinion,
Yeah, well,
but
I'm just
literally
trying-
10 million people could not
You've
leave
got
their home
1,400 people
in New
dying. You
York
don't know
for
who
several
told you
days
that, and now
because
people are boiling to
they
death
couldn't
in
breathe
their
in the Walk outside.
sweat. They're boiling to death. Perhaps they should put more deodorant on.
Alex, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm trying to have a grown-up conversation with you.
It's just like, yeah, exactly. It's just so ironic. They just, I think you need to grow up. It's just like, well, the guy's concerned about, the climate breaking down and people dying now, and that we're not doing enough about it. I mean, he sounds like fairly mature to me. Like he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but it's obviously like when people go on GB News or they go on Talk TV or whatever, you kind of know you're going on to be like monstered and attacked and made fun of. And obviously, like there are other times where that Mike Graham like tried to say that concrete grows or something like sometimes they get caught out and look absolutely ridiculous, but
Yeah, it's
uh,
interesting dynamics, isn't it, at the moment? Because that I've definitely felt in the last few months, or maybe over the last year, that kind of climate denialism is a bit more mainstream and a bit more backed up. I think there's, from my perspective, it's almost as if like, yes, we're seeing climate and nature breakdown, um, and yes, think we like it's pretty clear wherever you look in the world that is happening and people are suffering because of it. Not just people, environments and ecosystems and many animals as well. But um, now we're seeing a lot of the big organizations and companies and, like you say, the governments that are trying to basically just switch the capitalism over um, from oil and that kind of industry to the renewable industry, and kind of doing things the same way that they've always done, and not really. Like I was traveling around Scotland recently, and in a few of the Outer Hebrides, the islands up there, they're talking about putting hundreds, if not thousands, of massive windmills all the way around the island, and that will completely destroy the tourism there as well. And there's ecosystem, uh, the infrastructure that has to go into that is going to completely deteriorate the environment there. So it's kind of like being co-opted by these big organizations, and I think a lot of the people who are anti say the green revolution or whatever it is that we're talking about, they're actually anti these big industries coming in and trying to tax the average person to pay for it. and it's kind of like become this convoluted area where yeah, it's just a bit of a mess, isn't it? And I think people have lost a lot of clarity around it. For me, it doesn't take much to look around and see that where nature is struggling, that we are in a sixth great extinction, that things are heating up and things are drying out, and that the weather is getting pretty crazy out there, and that it's only gonna get more intense over the next few years. But to navigate that with how we do it, can we have a just transition? And again, seeing the ridicule that comes to these organizations that are just making sense. You know, you talk about Just Stop Oil, Insulate Britain, and it's all focused on the methods and not the message. And I don't know about you, but my timeline on, say, Twitter or whatever it's called now is all like climate and nature breakdown, and then the World Cup and sport and football in the UK and some politics and stuff. And it's strange to navigate, isn't it? Because you're like aware of the realities of the state of the world, but also in our own little bubbles, like things
I
are
think,
like,
yeah, I think obviously like the problem we have is like multifaceted in the sense that we seem like we've stumbled. I don't know if this is like social media influence. I think it probably to a large extent is, but we've kind of stumbled into an era of populism where we've had Trump and Johnson and Bolsonaro and like various other like ultra macho backwards blokes, old guys that just are like they're basically saying they're trying to just play to the masses and say like what everyone really wants to hear, rather than being grown-ups and actually just say, no, this is really bad, like we need to do something about this. It's not what you want to hear, but that's what real leaders do. And just be responsible about it. And obviously that to a large extent that happened in COVID as well, where there's just like the distinct lack of leadership across the board, um, just led to so many people unnecessarily dying. Um, but also, the fact that, especially in the UK, I think is probably one of the worst in terms of like the media monopolies, in the sense that most of the coverage is dominated by a few billionaires, um, peddling a certain message which is favourable to them, which is not obviously not going to go down well for most people. And then the serious lack of regulation and control over social media, especially we've seen with Twitter, or like it's called obviously X now, but I don't think anyone's going to drop Twitter anytime soon. But like it's just again billionaires that have got too much power that shouldn't really. I feel like a lot of these things should be publicly owned, because it's kind of like, yeah, it should be for social good. And aside from climate change denial and anti-vaxxers and that kind of thing, all this misinformation, you've got so much online abuse, whether it's racial abuse or body shaming, or you got all these issues that aren't in any way being properly looked after for people's mental well-being and health. um, it's just, yeah, those are obviously for me are main issues of getting through. um and like you said, like the other big issue, um for the majority of the world, is that we are locked into this fixed mindset of growth and capitalism. um and there has been other theories postulated by economists and stuff. It's like Kate Rayworth, who's like the donut economics and stuff. And I can't remember. There's a guy that wrote a book called "Prosperity Without Growth," and it was just like it's obviously possible. Like human beings invented current economics as we know it only in the last 100 years or so. Like so, and it's changed once or twice, drastically in that time as well. Um, so it needs to change. It just needs bold leadership that we don't currently have. Um,
Not in the political sphere anyway.
Certainly not in the political sphere, but like you said, perhaps the influence is waning, like, and was definitely has waned in the last 50 years, but perhaps it's going to continue to wane, and then it's going to be up to, you know, athletes, entertainers, whoever else, like, to step up to the plate and push people that, basically, I guess, kind of do what we were speaking about earlier, like nag the people that can actually make a difference into doing the right thing.
And I guess that's one thing that can get missed too when you're just doom scrolling through social media or watching the news and tuning into the mainstream, is that there are so many people, so many organizations that are really implementing game changing stuff out there that are, yeah, are working towards a more thriving planet. And it's kind of like this, um, these two forces, one's heading in that direction, and that's the mainstream that we see a lot. But there's another ecosystem that's being prepared, and it's kind of like, how can we, if if the planet and the world and people we're all on this path, like how can we get as many people to stop investing in this, stop recognizing it? Like, I think the less energy we put towards it, literally, the more we can put towards creating this new path. And it's not just one way to do things. There are
Mm.
so many avenues that we can take, like we've already discussed, the personal
Yeah.
stuff first, and then the structural stuff. I think one thing, people can get like kind of overwhelmed and think that, we can't do anything. But I think we've shown together that we can. There are changes we can make, and it's just like getting the right connections. And I've definitely got a lot of inspiration and motivation from you, from the likes of the guys at Football for Future, a group of young lads passionate about football that are working so hard to change the infrastructure behind it, to make a difference. And these people are out there in like every organization, every realm of society, making a difference. And I think as athletes, especially, the least we can do is to put our voice behind that, right?
Yeah, really well said. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that is the thing. It's like the silent masses of people that do want to make a difference and are, good, decent people that are also anxious and worried about the situation. But I think coming back to politics a little bit, something that I've recognized in sort of following it in the last 15, 20 years is just that, um, like, hope and positivity and opportunity often win. Like, if you tell people it's really a bad situation, like, it's not really get much better, like, don't do this, like, we need to stop doing this, like, if you're approaching it like that, or like, it's sort of the whole like project fear thing in Brexit, like, it doesn't seem to work, it doesn't seem to translate very much, it doesn't seem to inspire, it obviously doesn't seem to inspire people very much. Obama's big thing was hope. um, you know there's I just feel, and like, Brexit was framed in a way that leaving was a big opportunity. It was, the chance to be free and do what we want to do. um you know so, like, I just think there's actually a lot more positivity and opportunity and hope that we can drive, and, opportunities to make a difference, and to be someone that makes a difference, not someone who feels that they're, not able to, or doesn't know how to, or, I think there's so much scope for so many people to make a positive difference, for sure.
And I found myself caught in that trap a few times too, where it's just, it feels like too much. Like, I'm overwhelmed. I feel like I'm not making much of a difference. I don't know where to put my energy, where to put my efforts, and it's just like, it feels dark sometimes. And recently, I realized that I had also been kind of avoiding looking at the really hard stuff, like sitting down and watching the more recent documentaries. And I did that recently, and I tried to kind of like reconfront it all, which I think is I have to say one of the bravest things I've done, I think, is like watching the stuff like Earthlings, especially, was the hardest
Yeah,
thing I've ever
I
seen.
watched that. I watched that maybe a year or so ago, which was
Yeah,
it's a really brutal watch.
so tough to watch, but to see how big of a scale the issue is, but also to take that sovereignty upon ourselves to be like, okay, I can make a difference. And I think sometimes it's that balance between like consuming the information that's out there, and let's say the documentaries that are made, or the news that's happening, versus like what can I act on. And I think sometimes, um, if we're struggling to act on things, sometimes getting that information to like bring it closer to see the actual humans on the ground that are being affected, or the animals, or the environment, I think can definitely help motivate that kind of
Mm.
change. Um,
No, that's really interesting you say that. Like, because yeah, I do feel like I do worry sometimes that if I learn, the more I learn, the more scared I'm going to be,
yeah,
and the more afraid I'm going to be. And I
kind
think,
of.
yeah, to some extent, I think that is definitely the case, but would potentially give me more agency and more passion to
Mm.
drive forward and keep trying to make a difference as well. Um, but I do think that's actually probably one of the biggest problems we have, is that ignorance is bliss. And
Or the ignorant.
yeah, but I think a lot of it is people like think, like for voting, for example, we think, oh, what difference is my vote going to make? Like, it's just one vote. It's kind of like, yeah, the same sort of thing with climate. It's just like, well, if I just don't recycle this, or if I just like, what difference is it really going to make?
Yeah,
And yeah, it's just trying to get people to maybe own it a little bit, own their behavior a little bit, and also be like you say, like you felt like it was the brave thing to do, like to be a little bit braver and learn a bit more, and acknowledge that there is a serious problem that
yeah,
we need to fix, and not kind of just be passengers in that, like
yeah.
be
Because I think the more we see, the more we confront it, the easier it is to make those changes. It
yeah,
becomes the easier decision, because you're like, well, I don't want to do that because that means that this happens. So I'll just do this instead. And it feels good inside, and it helps you kind of, yeah, just make better choices, I think.
definitely. And I think come back to like the phrase that gets said a lot in sport is like control the controllables. I think you can only do what you can do,
Yeah.
and do the best that you can do, and also try and influence other people to do the best they can do. And that's if you're doing that, then be at peace, kind of thing. But I am a big believer as well in the butterfly effect and the cause and effect, in the sense that I do genuinely feel like, you know if you hold the door open for someone, they're more likely to hold the door open for someone else. But I do think that, doing the nice thing spreads, which like, and I feel like I have to believe that just for my own sanity to a large extent.
I find that too when I go to a new place or something. I'm feeling a bit lonely or whatever. Like, I'll just go out and just make eye contact and smile at strangers, and it's
Yeah,
amazing, just that little connection of two random people passing by in this time and place, and you notice each other and you acknowledge each other, and it's just something so simple can just make your day. It's crazy.
although there was a hilarious moment recently where, like, I had my daughter in the pram in the supermarket, and I was going. They were like, they weren't automatic doors. You had to, like, pull them open, and I was like on the inside going out, and a lady come to the door and like looked at me, and I was obviously had the baby in the pram. She looked at me, and like she then opened the door and then walked through the door and then shut the door and then looked at me. And I was just like, what are you doing? Like, I was just like, the normal human response in that scenario is to open the door and then wait for me to come through with the
And
baby.
it's true, yeah.
Like, even just do nothing, like, would have been better than that. Like, and I was just like, I looked at her and she looked at me, and I think she slowly started to dawn on her what she'd done, and she was just like, "Yeah," and then she just walked off, and I was just like, "What?" Honestly, but I kind of have to believe that she was just in a world of her own. She didn't really take it in, but I just watched the whole thing unfold and thought like, "What?
This happens.
What was that?"
I think that's the thing as well. I think that what I found when I started researching and figuring out how the world works is that I got a lot more present to things. I started, especially spending time in nature as well. I think you start to notice the birds around and the insects, and I think you just start to tune in a bit more to the natural rhythms of the world and what people are doing and how life's moving around you. And I think sometimes you look around and you can see so many people with their heads in the phones or their minds are just clearly. I mean, it's hard this day and age, right? To stay focused on things that we're passionate about because there's so many distractions and things coming at us that
Mm,
it's easy to see how people can get lost in their own world, and it's tricky
mm.
to figure out how to help people navigate that. But at the same time, you can't reach people who aren't ready to be reached. I
Yeah,
found
for sure. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. That's definitely true. Like, but I kind of feel like it's really cool for me in a way that like the things that I'm most passionate about, like environmentalism, mental health, like they're so like closely linked. Like it's scary. Like they're so closely linked, and like there's obviously loads of research that's gone into just walking in nature is really beneficial to your mental health,
that.
like which is amazing. Um, but all of it's about being, all this the stuff that's coming through now in psychology and mental health is all about being present and having you know a calm, present state of mind and having perspective. And nature just helps that in just every aspect. Um, just being in nature, doing one thing at a time, taking your time and really noticing things. It helps you be mindful and helps you be present. And because, like, putting it really simply, depression and anxiety is pretty much all about worrying about what's happened or worrying about what's going to happen, or lamenting too much on the past. Like, so it kind of is fairly logical, isn't it? Like the
Or
being
like
present
not getting
is so
those
key.
needs met that you need to. I've I've found that nature can meet so many needs sometimes. Of just like feeling held, feeling at home, feeling like even just sitting under a big tree and just the respect I have for the environment, for that tree to still be stood there when so many others have been cut down. Like for that bird to still be flying and singing their song so joyfully in the sunshine, like I think so much of that is missed when we're so busy with our day-to-day lives. And I think as athletes too, we can sometimes be so focused and driven. And I found it interesting too in Champions for Earth and other sporting um, slash environment organizations that there's a lot of kind of water-based athletes. And I think it comes from being in the rivers and being outside and just being a bit
That's a
more.
really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, and run and like runners as well. Like, the cross country runners seem to be like super hot on this as well.
Mm,
Um, yeah, that's a really good point. Like, sort of having a direct link with nature through their sport, and also obviously, with, say for example, like, Winter Olympics. Like, it's just so. I mean, I went.
being obvious.
My wife's family, they go skiing like relatively often, and the first time, you know my whole life I couldn't ski obviously because of football, which is a bummer,
Yeah,
but like I
it's the
went
worst.
I went with them to where they go, um, and they were kind of blown away with how little snow there was. Like they said, like normally the roads, either side of the roads, they're like above the level of the car of snow, and you're basically seeing grass like when you're driving in, and they couldn't believe it. Um, And so like to hear that from their perspective was really interesting. And
Mm.
obviously, like with was it the Olympics in China, they had to sort of make
Import
snow.
and like snow.
They had to make fake snow.
That's
Um, but yeah, no, it's yeah, that's really, yeah, it's really interesting you say that. Like, it's definitely
Yeah, and I
it
think that
definitely
again is also where athletes need to start taking responsibility because sport and our sport, no matter what level you're doing it on, whether you're in the grassroots or if you're at the top of the game, like we impact the environment and the environment impacts us. So we need to take more responsibility about the direction that's going. And without the players, without the athletes, there is no sport. There's nothing to watch. There's no organize like the people behind the scenes, the administration, all of that depends on the players being there to participate. So we have a
mm.
strong voice in that, and we can help shape the direction of the sports that we play. Um, football seems so big, doesn't it? But also there's just so much potential and
Oh
possibility.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But like with the whole nature environmentalism thing, like, you heard this phrase growing up all the time, but when people say, "Oh, the best things in life are free." But if you keep like sort of thinking about that and keep saying it, the best things in life are free. That's just so true. Like, because essentially, sport, like being active, free. You can just go and do that. Like, you know, run in the fields, swim in the lakes, whatever. Um, you know, all the stuff that's to do with human interaction and emotion and stuff is free. Like being present, all these things is like it's just fascinating how like when you really think about a phrase like that, you just think, oh yeah, like it's so true.
I find that a lot is that the more that I learned and understood about the world, the more that those like simple little catchphrases became
Yeah,
so like food is thy medicine, you are what you eat. I'm like, wow,
yeah,
literally, oh, literally.
yeah, totally. And it does, yeah, it doesn't have to be super like, philosophical and stuff. It's just like, yeah, those little ones, you're just like, yeah, they're bang on.
Makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, I think food is a big one as well. I think the food industry, when you start to look into that and the scale of it, and just you think like just a few generations ago, the majority of people were eating out of their backyards. They were trading food with their neighbors. They were self
I was thinking,
sufficient.
I was thinking about this the other day actually, because one of the young lads that just signed. Well, I don't know if he signed yet actually, but he's training with us. His family are like a long line of butchers, which is obviously like as a vegetarian you're just like, yeah, but like, but when I was thinking about it like, a little bit more, and I was thinking, well, obviously we used to have, butchers, greengrocers, all in like in a row
The
almost.
markets, not supermarket, but an
Yeah,
actual.
yeah, the market exactly. Like, where we sort of, middle class areas glorify farmers markets now.
Yeah,
It's just like,
community.
well, this is basically how it should be all the time. Like, it's just like, oh, it's just a nice thing to do on a Saturday. We're like, what? Well, it could be a nice thing to do every day. Like,
Yeah.
um, just like champion local businesses and stuff.
Oh,
Um, but yeah, it's kind of just born out of laziness, convenience.
yes. What did she say? Vandana Shiva. I heard her speak recently. She calls them deathly conveniences. Things that
Yeah,
we take convenience over health so often.
but the supermarket, as much as it's obviously amazing what it is in so many ways. It's all in one place. It's just incredible, especially the super ones where you can literally buy anything, like TVs,
I
whatever.
couldn't believe that when I came to England. I was like, what the hell? There's clothes in the supermarket. What is
Clear
going
clothes, electronics, like everything. Um, but it's actually pretty evil as well. It's pretty awful. Like, it seriously, seriously undercuts farmers, like to the point where they're then kind of it's like industrial scale farming, which is putting so much stress on the animals, especially, you know, where you've got sort of industrial dairy farms, for example, that's putting so much undue stress on the animals.
And then they pump them with antibiotics to help them survive the awful conditions, and then
Totally. But I mean, like coming back to sort of like we haven't actually touched on the whole hypocrisy aspect of it because that's obviously like a big thing that comes up a lot, especially for athletes. Um, but like my brother's a dairy farmer, he's a herdsman,
yeah,
and he always has loved cows, like always has loved animals, but always loved cows, and that's all what he's ever wanted to do was milk cows. Um, and my brother's autistic. He's got Asperger's syndrome, and so it's like kind of like an obsession for him, and he just like is besotted with them.
they're such
Um,
beautiful creatures. So sweet.
totally, and like he absolutely loves them, and it was interesting that in a previous job that he was working on an industrial farm, and he was actually got really distressed about it. Um, it really bothered him how they were indoors all the time and they were, you know, they just milked to the nth degree. Um, and to the point where it was almost therapy for him to go to a small scale local farm and see it's called turnout, I think. See the cows like released from the barn out into the field, and they literally look like they're jumping for joy.
They are. They're so joyful. They're just
Yeah,
wow,
and
grass, air, sun, wow, freedom.
yeah, like it's one of those things, isn't it? Where because I don't drink milk anymore, like cow's milk, and I do feel like we need to move away from those kind of practices. Like eventually,
Yeah,
it's conflicting on a personal level because of I don't want my brother to be out of a job. I don't want him to you know lose what he loves, if that makes sense.
and again, that comes back to the subsidies that go into these things, and how governments can play their roles in kind of encouraging more beneficial ways to work the land that don't cost the earth so much. I think without delving too much into the hellish realms of animal agriculture, because I could be here all day if we did that. I think once you see it, it's very easy to make decisions to opt out of that or to opt for healthier aspects of that. But and I definitely personally found performance benefits in that, especially ditching dairy. Um,
Mm. That's
but I guess
interesting because I guess I haven't really because I still have cheese like relatively often. So I haven't, I guess I if I'm brutally honest, like I didn't feel any different really from meat to fish to vegetarian. Like, so it would be interesting for me on a personal level to see if cutting out the dairy
yeah.
and the eggs like made the difference or made me feel that much better. Um,
For me,
you
I
know,
think I was definitely like I grew up in New Zealand. Dairy is huge for us. I was always told you gotta eat animals if you want to be an athlete, and those were the only two things I knew as a child was that I want to be an athlete and I love animals. Like those were my two truths. So I always felt really conflicted up until I was about 22 and I was starting to get desensitized. Like I really struggled just cutting up the meat. Like I knew that that chicken was a chicken that had a life. I couldn't really disassociate from that because I grew up with animals. I knew who they were. I knew they all had personalities. I knew that I loved them. And but eventually I did start convincing myself or like disassociating, I guess, from that. And then after a while I just yeah, I thought, nah, actually, it kept coming up, flashes on Facebook and stuff like, oh, look what happens to these lambs. And I'm like, oh, no, it doesn't happen to the animals I eat, whatever. And then,
yeah, the old ignorance is bliss.
yeah, and complete cognitive dissonance, I think, as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Like, you
it's
just
a
don't
great
want to
phrase. Yeah,
believe it.
yeah, yeah.
And until I just couldn't kid myself anymore. And I was, again, that really brave thing, I think, probably the bravest thing I've almost ever done, other than maybe moving to the other side of the world to play football, was to watch Earthlings and to watch
Mm,
it and to really understand how each individual and what they go through and what we put them through, and just I
Oh no,
can't
I think
imagine.
I think I think going vegan is very brave, like because I think socially it's incredibly difficult because you find yourself constantly, like even as a vegetarian, like you find yourself often saying, "Oh no, sorry, I can't have any of
Yeah,
that." I'll see what they've got down the shop. Like, yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, it's one of them where you're put in a position where you kind of you you have to be awkward, or you've made to feel like you're awkward. Um,
and the last thing I wanted to do was be one of those pesky vegans. I mean, I
well,
didn't even
yeah,
really know what vegan was, but then the more I understood about it, I was like, actually, I'm totally into that. Like causing
yeah.
the least harm possible. Like
But
avoiding.
also, like it's at odds with like I know who you are, and for me as well. Like you don't want to inconvenience people, and you don't want to feel like you're ungrateful if someone's cooked you a meal and it's like a beef lasagna or something. You're just like ah.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's they come with warning signs. Like,
yeah,
I find that I became the chef around the house. Like I would be inviting people over
yeah.
to come and eat
Same,
the
yeah.
food, and to
'Cause-
when once they get a taste for it and they understand a bit more about what it's about, then I think it's a lot easier for them to kind of be like, oh, do you want to come for dinner? I've got this, maybe, and I'll just be like, oh, well, I'll bring this, and this. And I
Yeah, it's
think
a good way of doing
you
it.
find ways to do it. But I definitely, when I was in Italy, especially, struggled to communicate it. I guess the language barrier, but also the cultural differences. It was really, really challenging in a social setting, but actually on my own, like you said, the fresh markets were there, and there was actually quite accessible to be vegan. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, the social setting is where it's challenging at times. But I think you just learn to navigate it, and I think being prepared with something delicious and nutritious, and I've gotten so good at like making a banging vegan dessert that it just makes things easy. I think that's the trick. Like find your niche, whether it's a nice starter or dinner or a dessert, and just rock up with that. You
Nice.
usually are. But yeah, I was gonna say if we could kind of if you had an athlete, right, who was just starting to understand the ways of the world, and wanting to take more responsibility in their lives, what would be some of the things you would recommend? Based on what we've just talked about, I'd say one of the first things to do is to spend your money on in your local community. Like bring it back down a scale, and yeah, look after your community in that way, and invest in your own community and those around you that are doing things simply and doing things well and doing things for the benefit of those around them. I'd say that would be one of my key ones. What's a couple of yours?
Yeah, that's a really good one. So something that I've got into lately is just using like secondhand apps or stores or whatever, like Vinted, for example. Just
Mm,
try not to buy things new. Like if they're in decent nick, like it's I just find it's fine. Like you don't have to buy things new anymore, which is really cool. And I think just across the board is the better way to go. Is to just get hand me downs or buy things or get things free on Facebook Marketplace or whatever. Like just be a little bit more creative on where because I've made mistakes in fairly recent years buying nice furniture and nice clothes and stuff, and I just think like in like 2 years the same stuff's going to be on Facebook Marketplace or Vinted or whatever, and I just think like why firstly did I waste my money, and why secondly did I just feel like I had to have that right now?
mm.
I just yeah, so I think that's quite a I just yeah, trying to buy new stuff, I suppose, is like a big thing.
Definitely like that. I mean, there's few little things here and there that you might have to invest in, but I think for the most part, I mean, my nana bought this for herself like 12 years ago, and it was too big for her. Like still fits me fine and feels good. I think um, you kind of like you said earlier about dropping the ego, right? But these things actually, I find it easier to kind of find your style and yeah, your own vibe by just going out there. I love a charity shop. and just browsing through and seeing, like, 99% of it, you're like, what the hell? But there's
Yeah.
that one
It's kind
little
of handy on a team bonding drinking session though, like getting like a mad outfit,
yeah, that's it.
which we've done a couple of times. But yeah, definitely. I think like by and large, I feel like with all the other stuff of being like an activist is not assuming that no one's started or done anything yet. Do your research first and find people that are already doing the things that you want to be doing, and then just say, "Can I help?"
Mm,
That's kind of what I did. That's kind of how I got started because I was like, went through this whole process of thinking, "Oh, what if I just set up my own foundation and because the PFA like help you with that setting up your own foundation." I was like, "Oh, that would be really cool." But then I was just like, is that not a little bit of like an ego trip thing? Like being like setting on my own foundation. Like, do I really need? Does it even need to be mine? Like, and also, and I don't knock anyone that does that. Obviously, it's like generally a really lovely thing to do. But at the same time, it's like it doesn't need to be mine. It doesn't need to be the David Wheeler Foundation. Like, and there are probably people that have, people more intelligent and more aware than I am that have already started on this road. So I don't just help them, and it would probably be less time intensive for me. Like with when I started out, I like just had my first child and like was doing my masters and stuff, and I was just like had no time to really dedicate to it. So like yeah, lend hand to the people that have already started, and then they'll help lift you along the way, and that's kind of what's happened to me, and maybe for you as well.
yeah, for sure. And I found also that I connect more with the fans and the people that also resonate with the message. I find,
Yeah.
like, today I met a guy from America who's in Scotland, and he's been following me for a while, and I just went to say hello, and he had a shirt with my name on the back, and I was just like, wow, this is incredible. And it's because he resonated with the message that I was putting out, not just because of the football that I was playing.
Mm.
So I think
Yeah,
that's something to consider. And if you're like feeling fearful about putting the message out, I think it takes courage sometimes to be, um, yeah, to put out a message that isn't maybe
mm,
necessarily what everybody else is saying, but that feels important to you. And I think that a lot of people resonate with it when you do that.
definitely. And I feel like a lot of people want more now from the people they look up to than just what they're gifted or talented at.
Yeah.
Like, because when I was a kid, it was like Bex, Zidane, Ronaldinho, and I was just like, all I cared about was they were unbelievably good at football. Um, whereas now, like, a hero of mine would be like Gary Lineker, for example. I just think not only was he a legend of a player, he now just seems to be kind of this one man, bastion of hope, like for people in like football and that are interested in other issues that are like really socially important.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like I think people are caring. I feel like people are caring more about also what their heroes care about rather than just what they're good at.
Nice. So that's a few of the things. One, do your research and figure out little things that you can change in your life that give you courage and hope and make you feel good. Two was to spend money in local areas and not buy things new all the time, and to
Follow
um,
your money, follow the pension stuff and your investments, and yeah, follow it. Like look at everything you spend. Like where's your money going?
yeah, yeah. And I think that's the thing about the economic system that we live in, is that it's built on where we put our money, and I think we
Yeah,
can create a new world with every dollar that we spend with the
yeah.
direction.
Like every dollar, every pound is a vote
Yeah,
for something.
that's a big one. And then just be brave, be courageous, say the things you want to say. I think um, that's definitely how we've connected. Few and far between of athletes and footballers, especially, that are speaking out on this thing. So A shout out to all of those who are watching this. We might have to cut a little bit because no, I think it was all pretty good stuff, and hopefully it resonates with people out there because I know, yeah, it's not always a straightforward and easy journey. It's difficult times that we find ourselves in, but I think we can just keep encouraging each other and learning from each other, and my
Yeah, and I would say like reach out to us as well because it isn't like, let's face it, it's not going to be, there's not going to be loads of people, you know, messaging us directly like about this stuff. Like, so don't feel like, you know, we're going to be inundated with requests and stuff. Like, reach out, like, you know, especially if you're, you know, a fellow athlete or sports person that,
yeah,
you know, wants to make a difference, wants to use their voice in a positive way. Like, we're like really really desperate for more people, because it will make a massive difference, like, to the cause and to us to have, you know, more people in the same boat.
totally, totally. Join the team. Come join Champions for and Football for Future. And yeah, okay. Thank you, David, so much for your time. I'm sure we'll have to do this again and check in at a later date. There's still so much that we didn't get around to, but I think we've covered up a fair bit. So yeah, cheers, man. Thank you.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks for inviting me, and yeah, it's good to have a proper chat.